Hey everybody, what is going on? So in this section, we're going to talk all about how you can handle objections. When we talk about objections, there are a couple things that you got to keep in mind. And just know that in every sale or almost every sale, people are going to have objections. And you do not want to view objections as something negative. These are prospects basically giving you data on why they need help buying. If you're able to solve these objections, you're going to make it much more easier and make people feel much more confident when they buy your product or service. Don't think objections as something negative. It's almost like a shortcut to understanding why people aren't buying right away. Now, there are a couple key things you got to know about objections before we really dive into some examples. And that is, when it comes to objections, you really need to get into the mindset of getting down to the truth and intent behind why people even ask the objection in the first place. So when people typically run into objections, a lot of times they're going to answer very emotionally. So let's say a prospect says, I think the other competitor is cheaper. If you're the salesperson, a lot of times emotional salespeople will say, well, our product is better. And that's not what people want to hear, right? Emotionally, that's what we want to say, and we want to force the person to see things our way. But to really handle objections, you got to be a lot more stealthy about it, and you got to really use jujitsu, right? Meaning you got to take the other person's energy, and then you want to reverse it, and then come back with a response that get them to see why your product or service offers so much value and is so different from the competition. So you got to understand the truth of why people are asking the objection, and you want to get it head on. You don't want to make the assumption and assume why people ask. You want to hear it from their mouths. And objections, when you're answering objections, you're just really using clarifying questions. And so that's pretty much answering their questions with questions. So if somebody says, why is your product so expensive? Then you could say, well, is price something that is very important to you? So in that situation, that's going to be a clarifying question, because you're clarifying and you're understanding the intent on why people even ask the question in the first place. Again, you do not want to be defensive. You just want to answer their questions with your questions to understand their intent. Every sale is going to have different objections, right? And you may be selling a product or service, and every time you might get different type of objections. But once you do it for a while, you'll understand that there's common patterns that people have, and you'll find that people are going to ask the same objections over and over after you do a number of calls. So this is where it's important to really remember what these objections are, write them down, and come up with ways to overcome those objections, whether it's using clarifying questions and then addressing the objection head on, or whether it's addressing the objection when you're trying to pitch your product or service during that time period. So again, every sale is going to have different objections, and throughout this section, I'm going to give you a couple examples of how to handle objections, but just know that they may or may not be applicable for your business. And so the most important thing is to understand this mindset of how to tackle these objections, because every objection is going to be different. You're going to want to be able to critically think through problems so that you can actually do it for yourself rather than just memorizing a script. So with that said, let's go ahead and go into the worksheet where we're going to dive into objections. All right, so over here, we are in the sales legacy script, and this part is going to be called objections. And as you can see here, it's very easy to edit anything you want. You can type right here. And so the reason I did this is because for your objections, for your product or service or industry, you're going to have different objections from the next salesperson or the next entrepreneur. So that's why you want to make sure that you're putting in your specific objections that you commonly come across and put them here, and make sure that you have ways to deal with them, whether it's using a question to answer a question, and then clarifying their intent, and then addressing it head on. So that's pretty much the formula that you want to use when you're handling objections. So let's just go through some examples so you can see how I'm doing this, and then you can get some ideas on how you can do it for your product or service. Okay, so a common objection that a lot of people have is we don't have the budget, right? People just don't have money, or maybe they're saying that because they want a better deal from you. So something I would say is, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Now, with everything we talked about so far, are you sure this is something you actually want to do? Because if it's not, that's totally fine. So once I ask that question, right, I'm really getting to the bottom of what's really going on, right? And I want to understand if they actually have money, or maybe they're really tight on money, or what's the situation? I'm not really sure, because they say they don't have the budget, but what does that really mean? And that's why you want to ask a clarifying question. From there, a prospect might say, well, yeah, it is, right? Meaning it's something that they want to do, but they say, I just don't have the money right now. And so you could say, all right, so what do you need to make this happen? And so from there, that's going to be an open-ended question where even though the prospect doesn't have money right now, maybe they may have money in the future, or maybe they could borrow some money, or maybe they're going to get some round of investing. You don't know, right? That's why you want to figure it out. So the prospect might come back and they say, well, I don't have the money right now, but we're about to head into our biggest sale month. So maybe by the end of next month or the month after that, we're going to have money and maybe we can resume the talks at that time, right? And a lot of times that happens because timing is very important and sometimes it's just not the right time for a prospect to buy. But for you as a salesperson, you need to figure out why that person is not saying yes. If they don't have the budget, understand if it's a timing issue or maybe, or if it's something else, right? You just don't know. And that's why you ask a clarifying question. So another way you can handle it is, let's say the prospect says, we don't have the budget. All right. So it's same question, but another way to handle it. So I could say something like, okay, that's fair. Now I've talked to a lot of clients similar to you where there just isn't any budget right now, and that's fine. But if it's okay with you, I just wanted to give you a better sense of how we might be able to help you so that in the future, we can make time to talk again. Does that sound fair to you? And that person's going to say yes. So in this situation, sometimes you are selling to larger companies, right? And they say they don't have the budget and it's just not the right timing for them to buy. But you know that if you begin the conversations, maybe 3 months down, 6 months down, 1 year down the line, depending on how long your sales cycle is, you can resume that conversation when suddenly they have the budget, maybe at the beginning of the year. So this works really well for really big enterprise deals because people aren't just going to buy right away, and it's very difficult or almost impossible to close them on the first call because there's so many decision-making processes that need to happen and timing needs to be right. So if you're trying to sell in the enterprise, if people don't have the budget or maybe it's not the right time or maybe they're working with a competitor, you just want to build that relationship, make sure they clearly understand what value you're offering so that one day in the future, maybe when you follow up or maybe they're going to follow up with you, that you can continue the conversation. But if you never have the opportunity to have that conversation, then you're never going to be able to sell to them. So that's just another way to continue the conversation. So let's go into another objection. Someone might say, I need more time before I can make a decision like this, right? Maybe it's a big decision. They're going to spend thousands of dollars and they just don't know if it's the right decision or not. And you could say, okay, that makes sense, right? That's that empathy. How much time do you need? And they might say, I need a week, I need a month, I need a year, whatever it is, right? And then you come back and say, okay, well, is there anything in particular you need to understand before making that decision? Because I understand you need 1 week to make that decision, but within that week, what is it that you need to understand? Right? So even if someone gives you a timeline, they're not really giving you a concrete reason for why they need so much time. So by clarifying even further, maybe you can answer all their objections and clarify everything on that call, right? You don't want to leave it to chance and you don't want to just wait it out and be like, oh, this guy said he's going to call me in a month. I'll wait a month. You do not want to do that. What you want to do instead is you want to get to the bottom of why they are hesitating to make a decision. And you can essentially do that all on the first call and understand all the pieces. You may not be able to close the deal because of complications on that first call, but you can understand why that deal isn't closing and you can get a really good idea of when it will close in the future. Okay, another objection is I need to talk to my partner first or my wife first, my kids first, or whoever it is first, right? You say, all right, that makes sense. And for me, I like to put this padding over here and just kind of let them feel like I really understand them and empathetic toward this situation. Up to you, to your style, but I like to add that padding. And then so I'll say, all right, that makes sense. When do you think you'll be talking to your partner about this, right? And they're going to give you a timeline. They're going to say, okay, well, probably tomorrow we have a meeting we're going to see if it makes sense. And then I could say something like, okay, so if you're talking to your partner tomorrow, after that, when do you think it makes sense for us to revisit this conversation? So by me saying that, I'm basically trying to schedule that next meeting instead of just saying, okay, that's fine, talk to your partner first and reach back out to me. They'll never reach back out. But if I say, okay, you want to talk to your partner tomorrow, when does it make sense to talk again? They might say, okay, maybe a week after that, and then you schedule that meeting. Essentially, these are common ways to control the timing and handle these objections. Just from my experience from working at Oracle and Silicon Valley and stuff, these are common objections that I ran into a lot. And that's why I wanted to use these as an example for you to get inspiration from. But of course, every sale is going to be different. Every product or service or industry, you might have something different for the next person. So that's why you want to make sure that you have your most common objections here. And you want to make sure that when you're going into meetings, once you understand these common objections, that you can very fluidly overcome these objections and really understand the intent on why people ask them. So that's everything that we have to cover when it comes to objections. Again, this is all editable, and the most important part is really understanding the mindset of how to overcome these objections, not necessarily memorizing your script, but really using clarifying questions, understanding the intent of why people ask, and then really understand and getting controlling the frame of the conversation moving forward. So with that said, that's everything when it comes to objections, and I'm going to see you guys in the next lesson.